I am an Orthodox Jew. I'm a religious person. Faith is very important to me and always has been. I heard about Israel from the time I was a baby. We read the Bible in Hebrew, even though my native language is English. For me, faith, religion, and Israel have always gone together. In fact, my understanding of what Israel was at a young age was much more grounded in a biblical understanding than it was in any kind of modern understanding. I remember I was just a kid in 4th or 5th grade when the Six-Day War broke out. For us, it was an absolute no-no. You did not watch TV during dinner time. And all of a sudden, there was this little TV that showed up in the kitchen as we were watching supper, as we were eating supper, because it was such a tense time and we were concerned what's going on in Israel. And then almost overnight, all of that changed. 50 years ago, June 1967, in just 6 days, Israel went from a situation of being completely threatened on all sides by armies that far exceeded her capability in numbers and in ammunition. Suddenly, we had liberated the heart of biblical Israel. I remember hearing about this as a child, and Hebron. We're back in Hebron. The Temple Mount is in our hands, and all these amazing, amazing statements. And of course, our teachers with their transistor radios, for those of you who have any memory of what a transistor radio is. And I remember even then, as a child, being a bit puzzled. Because if Hebron wasn't part of Israel until then, well, what exactly was Israel? I mean, if you know Israel from the Bible, and if you understand Israel from a religious point of view, as a Jew, you know that for 2,000 years, our people have been praying to come back to Israel, to come back to Jerusalem, to come back to Zion, to come back to where the temple stood. Well, if the Temple Mount wasn't part of Israel, then, well, what is this all about? Of course, after a few years, and even at that point, I gained a better understanding and understood that the history of modern Israel was a process. That in 1948, we may have become a state, but we didn't yet have all those parts of Israel that were so central to us, both from the biblical period and even in those 2,000 years in between the destruction of the temple and where we are today. And in 1967, that all came together for the first time in an amazing way. Now, everybody in Israel and Jews all over the world were very excited about the victory in 1967 for many reasons. And there's no question Israel was a much safer place after this victory than it was before. But from a religious perspective, and when I say religious perspective in this context, I am not only referring to those Jews who consider themselves Orthodox or religiously observant. I'm talking about a religious sensibility that probably touched almost, if not every Jew all over the world at that point in time. It was something that before they had a chance to analyze and said, well, is this a good thing that we're in Judea and Samaria, or is it a bad thing? No one had asked those questions at that time. They just knew from their gut that we had come home. There was an enthusiasm that was palpable that even I as a young girl could feel and understand, and it's a feeling I have carried with me all those years, and it has only grown and become deeper in my own experience. I'm going to fast forward. I'm 18 years old, and I come to Israel for the first time as a student. I spend a year studying Bible, Tanakh, as we call it in Hebrew, in Jerusalem. And while I'm here, the so-called settlement movement is beginning. In fact, there had been a bit of settlement before then. Right after the Six-Day War, Jews settled in Gush Etzion, an area that had been settled by Jews back before Israel's independence in the 1940s, an area that had fallen to the Jordanians in Israel's War of Independence. And then there had been an amazing settlement of Jews in Hebron, where in 1968 Jews went to celebrate the Passover holiday, and that grew into a community. But there was nothing in Samaria. For some reason that I'm not quite sure how we explain, these few things in Judea, a little bit in the Jordan Valley, and then everyone kind of went to sleep. When I got to Israel in 1975, there was a movement that had just gotten started again. They called themselves Elon Moreh, Hebrew for the Oak of Moreh. It was a group that set as their purpose, as their objective, to settle near Shechem. They were naming themselves after the original place where Abraham had first stopped in the land of Israel, where Abraham heard God's promise that he would give this land, the land that Abraham had just entered, he would give this land to his children. Well, how could I not be excited about something like that? And I remember there was some debate going on in Israel, and I was kind of only vaguely aware of it because my Hebrew wasn't as good as it is today, and I wasn't watching very much television. There wasn't very much television in Israel in 1975, but it was just a movement that I had to be part of. They were going out there in December on Hanukkah. They were going to go out and settle right there somewhere. Actually, they were aiming for a place called Sebastia. Sebastia was the Roman name assigned to the original Samaria, the capital city of the northern kingdom. They were going to go there, somewhere near there, set up some tents, start a community, hopefully with enough grassroots support, get the government of Israel to approve it. And they succeeded. In the rain, I was actually supposed to be there. I overslept. I missed the bus. Never mind. It succeeded. 2 weeks later, what happened was the government of Israel said, okay, you can settle temporarily in a military camp in a place called Kadum on the western side of Shechem. I went with two friends a couple of weeks later, spent a very freezing Shabbat in that army camp, sleeping in a tent. This was January in the northern hemisphere, but it was an amazing, amazing experience. And we came on a Thursday night. Friday morning, I remember going out and walking with some of the leaders of the community, and they were so excited. It was insanely primitive. There were these families, some of them even had babies, were living in tents and barracks. And if you had asked them at that point, you would have thought, this is it. We have established the new kingdom in Samaria. And I looked at these people and I said, what are you, crazy? 30 families in an army camp? What do you really think you've accomplished? And they took us out and they showed us the mountains. And by the way, in those years, these mountains were truly empty. There were no Jews. And you know what? There were very few Arabs. Empty of agriculture, empty of trees, empty of homes. And they looked out and they said, this is the beginning of the redemption. We are taking part in the fulfillment of prophecy. Our little 30 families in this little army camp have opened the doors. And I have to admit, I was torn. Because as a religious person, this spoke to me profoundly. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to grasp it. I wanted to be part of it. In fact, I felt, in a way, I'm only 18. I'm not yet my own boss, I want to be part of this. I want to be just like 5 years older. But there was a part of me that was a bit cynical already. Says, well, I'm grown up. Oh, is this realistic? Is this really going to happen? And you know what? They were right. I don't remember who it was Ben Gurion or someone else who once said, to be a realist in Israel, you have to be a dreamer. And I would kind of say all of Israel, and I would venture to say that even the most secular person in Israel has a religious element to him. He may not admit it, but there's something that we, even in Judaism, we would all call a pintele yid, a little Jewish spark that every Jew carries in him. And you can think that you're far from prayer. You can think that you're far from the Bible, but you're connected. You can't help it. And especially Jews living in Israel, we're connected because this is where we are from. And this is where we started. And to come back and live here in the heart of biblical Israel, in the place where our forefathers began, where Abraham first received that promise, where his children, Isaac and Jacob, received additional promises, where Joshua first brought the nation of Israel into the land. The first place where the nation of Israel entered into a covenant with God in the land of Israel was right near that same Oak of Moreh, right near that same biblical Shechem. It was in Samaria. It wasn't in Tel Aviv. It wasn't in Haifa. For us to come back here was no question taking part in God's plan, a plan that he had set forth all the way in time of Abraham. God promises that even after a time of curses, after a time of exile, he will bring us back. And we came back. So for me as a Jew, as much as I have a national pride, I made Aliyah. I moved to Israel because I believe that this is the Jewish country, and every Jew, if they want to express their national identity to the fullest, they need to be here in Israel. But as a religious Jew, I see the movement of history as something that has been directed by God from the beginning. And yes, we need to take part in it. It is not enough for us to sit back and watch the events go by. God opens the doors, but we have to walk in through those doors and make the difference. One of the most amazing things that happened to me in this long journey I've been on, and I've been actually from almost the moment I arrived in Israel, I began advocating for Judea and Samaria. We signed a contract literally within weeks of arriving here to build our home, and I've been living in Samaria for more than 30 years. And in the course of advocating for Judea and Samaria, speaking to audiences in the press, very often hostile audiences, it's no secret, this is a controversial issue. Settlements are usually a dirty word in so many different circles. And yet, at some point, I started encountering Christians who said, one second, this biblical stuff you're talking about, we agree with that. It's in our Bible too. Of course, I had a vague understanding of Christianity because I grew up in the United States, but for me, Christianity was Christmas. You know, lights, sales the next day. I could really relate to that. In Israel, I met Christians that came from around the world. Christians from the States, and Christians from Europe, and Christians from Australia, and from South America, and all kinds of places. Christians who were coming to Israel because they wanted to connect, first of all, with the miracle of the restoration of Israel, and specifically with people like me. I once, at the beginning of this work, we started this work of outreach to Christians, sharing, building bridges together in order to strengthen Judea and Samaria. I once was, in the beginning of that work, I was on a hike with my family, and we were at this actually gorgeous spring in the Galilee. And there was this woman, and she was looking at me, and she was clearly a tourist. Well, it turns out she was a Dutch Christian woman, and she was eager to find a way to talk to me, and I don't know, she kind of said something to me, and I engaged her in conversation. She said to me, well, where are you from? I said, well, I live in Samaria. She goes, I was looking at you. I wanted to connect with you. She had this feeling by the way I looked, the way my children, I don't know, she just had this sense. And that was just one of many friendships that I have built with wonderful Christians who have come from all over the world, who've said, we want to partner with you because we believe in what you're doing. We believe that the land of Israel, it belongs to the Jewish people, and Judea and Samaria is the biblical heartland of that idea, of that theology, of that ideology. And so we've been part of that for a long time. Now, one last thing I just want to say before I conclude. Some people think religion, weirdos, fanatics, extremists. You know what? There are religious people all over the world. And when you encounter religious people, people with faith, when you encounter them in the workplace, professionally, they're no different from anyone else. But there's something that we do share that others may not share. We have a motivation, we have an ideology, we have a faith that for us is higher than everything else. I came to Israel and I came to live in Judea and Samaria because I thought it was the right thing to do. But I was willing to take risks, make sacrifices because I believe this is what God wants me to be doing. And I have found and partnered with Christians that really get it when I say that because they say the same thing. And I think religion not only plays an enormous role in the settlement movement here in Israel, but the religious commitment that we have expressed and that we are acting on in settling Judea and Samaria has become a message that resonates with religious people, particularly Christians, all over the world. And I thank God that I have been privileged to be a part of this. And I want to invite every one of you, people of faith, Christians, Jews, join us. Stand with us. Come and visit. See what we're doing. Take part in what God is clearly doing here in the land of Israel. Thank you.